I've started. Yeah, and it's being recorded now.
It's being recorded. Okay, so I guess it's time to begin the webinar. So once again, hello, and a very good afternoon to all our esteemed guests, my colleagues, and to all those who've joined us online for this extremely interesting and I'm sure very important webinar. Before I begin, I would just like to quickly inform everybody that this webinar is being recorded. To give you some context, it was way back in December 2024 that as part of a UNEP-led project, Electrifying Mobility in Cities, investing in the transformation to electric mobility in India, which is funded by the Global Environment Facility, WRI India basically conducted a roundtable discussion. So this roundtable discussion had brought together stakeholders from across government bodies, academia, EV OEMs, battery OEMs, recycle and repurposing companies. And it was in this roundtable discussion that a lot of emphasis was laid down on building this robust battery data sharing framework in India. As part of the same project and taking forward the insights and lessons from this roundtable discussion, the Battery Summit was organized in May this year here in India. And in the Battery Summit, we had managed to get together a much wider group of stakeholders. The objective was to deliberate on some of the most critical challenges that the Indian battery ecosystem is facing today. And I would like to mention that it was also in this summit that the consortium-led prototype of a Battery Aadhaar was also successfully executed. Now, today's webinar intends to further these deliberations on this evolving concept of Battery Aadhaar. The webinar is being done in collaboration with Battery360 Alliance. It is supported under the UNEP project, as I mentioned, Electrifying Mobility in Cities, which is funded by Jeff. This project focuses on freight electrification, battery circularity, EV charging infra, and it works towards an accelerated and an equitable transition to electric mobility. This project is being executed under the leadership of NITI Aayog. With that laid down, I would now like to invite Ms. Chaitanya Kanuri. She's the Associate Director at WRI India, who leads the e-mobility initiatives for the organization, to set the context and elaborate a bit on what today's webinar will be focusing on. So over to you, Chaitanya.
Thank you, Anubhav. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my very great pleasure to be part of this very important gathering focused on developing a discussion on developing a Battery Aadhaar framework for India. So as we all know, batteries will be playing a crucial role in India's clean energy transition. They'll be powering everything from electric vehicles to improving our uptake of renewable energy. And in this line, annual battery demand is expected to skyrocket in India, reaching 160 gigawatt hours by 2030, largely led by the uptake of electric vehicles. Further beyond 2030 also, a lot of the growth in the battery requirements is expected to come from the battery energy storage systems, hitting close to 2,000 gigawatt hours by the 2047-2050 time range as per projections. So in keeping with our desire to be more energy secure, the domestic manufacturing of EV batteries, EV cells and their components, which is in its infancy today, is also expected to pick up speed. However, domestic manufacturing will require critical minerals that India does not mine today, like lithium, nickel, cobalt, and others based on whatever battery chemistries are picking up speed. So one of the key things we do need to nurture as our battery ecosystem is growing is a strong circular economy for batteries, one which allows us to fulfill some of our critical mineral requirements through recovered materials from used batteries, which are recycled, and one which enables an overall reduction in the battery demand by optimizing second life applications for used batteries. Through global research and policy frameworks, one of the recognized components of achieving battery circularity is a strong battery data sharing framework. In the EU, this is known as a battery passport today. What this does is creates a unique, trackable, and traceable identifier for every battery pack and allows ease of data sharing across the wide range of stakeholders that are involved in the battery value chain. This in turn can strengthen battery circularity in a myriad of ways, right? It can extend battery life. It can improve the efficiency of reverse logistics. It can enable better reuse versus recycling decision making. It can ease battery sorting and dismantling of used batteries. And it can reduce the need for testing and pre-treatment processes during reuse and recycling. These also have corresponding economic benefits in addition to the environmental benefits of circularity. So improved resale value for used batteries, reduced procurement, pre-treatment, and testing costs for battery reuse and recycling. And therefore, the battery passport is something that we have seen as a demand that is coming up both from industry and government. Apart from circularity as well, we see that battery passports can facilitate multiple important use cases like responsible sourcing of critical raw materials, enhanced battery performance and safety, enabling of battery as a service business models, and more comparable assessments of battery carbon footprints. In India, we have had the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India in their EV R&D roadmap in 2024, who first enshrined the need for a Battery Aadhaar for India in an official document. And apart from that as well, we've had NITI Aayog, the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, Ministry of Mines, and other government stakeholders as well, highlight the need for a Battery Aadhaar, which is what we are calling as a equivalent of a battery passport, across various fora. And as we've mentioned, we have heard the same request from multiple industry stakeholders as well. In line with this, as Anubhav said a few months ago, we are very proud to have been part of a collaborative effort led by industry stakeholders like Tata Motors, Tata Elxsi, Loham, Noonam, Urja, under the guidance of the Department of Science and Technology and IIT Kharagpur, in having launched a small prototype of a Battery Aadhaar. And today we're building on this discussion, which we think is growing in the country and for which we think there is a strong need in this country. And today's discussion turns its lens to yet another critical aspect of the Battery Aadhaar puzzle. What is the technology framework and what are the principles that can create the foundation of a robust Battery Aadhaar? One which is interoperable and one which is credible, verifiable, and trustable. I expect this to be a very enriching session, and I look forward to the discussion. Back to you, Anubhav.
Thank you, Chaitanya. So, yeah, so as Chaitanya explained, India is in the stage of exploring the advantages, the use cases, but at the same time, we are also trying to explore how would the digital architecture of such a system for India addressing India's problems would look like. But at the same time, as Chaitanya mentioned, we also have to accept the fact that EU, the European Union, has made significant strides in this, especially after the implementation of the battery regulations in 2023. So I guess it only makes us wise to understand how has that evolved in the European Union? How is the technological ecosystem in European Union evolving? How is it addressing the challenges? And more importantly, how is the ecosystem reacting to these battery regulations? So to throw more light on this and to specifically talk about the evolution of the technical ecosystem around battery passports in European Union, I would first like to invite a speaker, Dr. Arnav Mishra. Dr. Arnav Mishra he holds a PhD in computer science and he has extensive R&D and software development experiences, which is also complemented by know-how in batteries business and materials from his past roles at BASF. Currently, he serves as the MD and CEO of Data Space Solutions, which is a BASF company. and is working towards enabling and advancing circular and sustainable economic growth through, very importantly, innovative digital solutions in the EU. So, Dr. Arnav Mishra, I hand over the session to you, and please take us through your presentation.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see your presentation right now. Sorry, just before you begin, just a small little point to all the attendees there. We do have a separate Q&A session after the panel discussion. And so whatever questions you have, if you look at your Zoom window, there's a Q&A tab at the bottom. So you can go to the tab and keep posting your questions. We will be taking up your questions during the Q&A session. So that was just a small announcement. Arnav, please go on.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. So it's quite my honor to come and speak here and give you sort of my job for today is to set the context for you, sort of introducing what we have done in Europe and how this is developing towards, then I'll take you through this journey till battery passport, and then we will sort of pull back from there, right? So to sort of make it a little bit more high level than making it too deep into battery passports. Okay, so 2 words, why are you listening to me? So we are Data Space Solutions, as Anubhav already said. It's a 100% daughter company of BASF SE, which is the largest chemical company in the world. You might have heard about it. So we are young. We are established in February, but we are not naive. That's what we say, because the team that has been carved out of BASF has extensive experience and participation in these all topics of building ecosystems globally and dealing with these use cases of battery passport, product carbon footprint exchange, traceability, certificate management, etc., 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 which is then boiling down to this whole initiative that we are also talking today. The whole idea why BASF actually made the strategic investment and why we exist is the fact that we have realized that in order to implement such decentralized networks, there needs to be a clear understanding of how the businesses work. How does the material companies across value chains operate in today's world, and what is really needed, the pain points that they are experiencing, and that would lead to the right decisions when it comes to technology, putting the right technology by following the business. And that we realized that in order to do so, we need to be able to do this at a scale where we are talking about now onboarding hundreds of thousands of companies, connecting them into these decentralized networks. As Anubhav said, so we will have a question answering session at the end, but then do feel free to reach out to me in case there's something that appealed to you or you want to follow up later with me. I'm happy to answer questions, get connected, discuss further. All right, so where does the story start? The story really starts, the real problem comes from the tsunami of regulations. So this is on the right-hand side, what you see is a small depiction of some selected regulations that are going to affect the automotive industry. Yeah. And this goes beyond automotive. This goes to chemicals, manufacturing, cement, rubber, steel, iron, etc. So under this whole initiative of Green Deal, which is becoming net zero by 2050, now what these regulations really at the heart of it bring is a new way of reporting, a new way of creating transparency at the European level, plus on the top, opportunities to create circular economy, circularities to optimize business processes, and then to offer probably more opportunities for top line, bottom line optimization for the individual participants of the circularity. We'll come to that in a second, but 3 core aspects that these regulations really focus on, from my perspective, setting the context toward all the battery passport is traceability, having the ability to track materials through these complicated supply chains or value chains, sustainability, better reporting when it comes to due diligence, when it comes to ESG, when it comes to carbon footprint, And then finally, recycle and reuse. So you might have heard about the end of life directives that are coming up, which requires a certain quota of recycled materials to be put into any product that is manufactured in Europe, or setting certain targets on recycling yields. So once these three core, let's say, aspects of these regulations are going to hit the automotive industry, and when you look at specifically to the battery value chains, it has already started, right? So 18th of February, when was this Delegation Act for carbon footprint reporting was going to come, it's delayed slightly now, but then in 2025, so disclosure of raw materials, recycling efficiencies, and then in 2027, there will be mandatory battery passports that need to be issued. Without these battery passports, essentially the batteries cannot go to the market. And then beyond that, what we are talking about is, while we are focusing on the battery regulations, the batteries here, but beyond that, there will be need for more digital product passports scaling out to other products, not just batteries anymore. And now, okay, taking a step back, looking at that wave, now, so the wave, the tsunami of regulations that are coming in, what is now the understanding in Europe is a single company cannot deal with this, right? So it needs to be an industry level, a governmental and academic joint effort to deal with these regulations. And that the answer here is what Europe is working on is so-called data spaces and ecosystems, right? So the data spaces and ecosystems provide foundation, building data sharing infrastructures where companies can come together and then try to address the necessary regulatory needs to comply with the regulations. And it's a concrete investment. So as of today, you see on the right-hand side, there are many data spaces already operational. The largest one is Catena X, which is the automotive data space ecosystem. Then there is Factory X in the aerospace X, Semiconductor X, etc., etc. One of the chemical industry data space that BASF and the TFS together for sustainability group of chemical companies are working towards is also called ChemX. So there are many of these X's that are getting developed now. And this requires considerable funding. Since 2019, Europe Union has already spent about 3,800. So comma in German is, so here, 3,800 million euros already on these investments coming from different countries here. What do these so-called data spaces and ecosystems bring to the table? So primarily focus on decentralization, which simply means that the data is not consolidated in a central platform. It needs to be decentral. Every company needs to have their own, let's say, way of maintaining and provisioning the data through this interconnected decentralized platforms or ecosystems. Data sovereignty, which is quite critical, where each entity should have the right to own their own data, use the data in their own terms, their own operational business data, and also decide whom they want to give the data to, push the data to. And finally, interoperability. Interoperability is a more technical concept where when we are talking about this network of companies getting onboarded, they need to talk to each other. Standardization of APIs, communication protocols, security, identity, etc. This is where interoperability comes in. And the lighthouse project here in leading all of the big table is Catena X, which is really turning out to be one of the largest data spaces right now. And it is primarily focused on the automotive network. So from here on, when we say battery passports, though battery regulations cover all sorts of batteries above 2 kilowatt hours capacity, we will focus on EV batteries for now. Though the same regulation also applies to stationary storage batteries and other batteries. So in order to understand how to set up these ecosystems, what are the three main layers that we need to focus on if you want to set up these type of collaborative environments so that we can bring companies together? So they're essentially, it's a three-dimensional picture, as you see on the left-hand side. On the bottom layer, it needs to be the foundational core services, which is which is then open source. This is where all the kits or development, let's say, source code is published through the participation or development of many players in the industries, technical service providers, automotive. They come together, they build this foundational technology and then make it available for everybody as open source. So once the foundation is done, then you need an operation layer. So that you need an operating company, you need a business layer to ensure that the data space, the ecosystem is breathing, is living, it's self-sustaining. And that is quite important because in the end, it will be used by many companies that will be then onboarded to these ecosystems. So you need to have a self-sustaining, healthy ecosystem going on. And this also really manages operations like contract management, verification of companies that want to join the ecosystems, communications, etc. And one additional thing that Catena X runs in this operation layer is an app store. And what this app store does is it invites digital service providers like Dataspace Solutions to then come in and offer digital services on top of these foundational layers. Yeah, and this could be addressing battery passport application, if you will, or this could be quality management application, traceability application, and so on and so forth. And then you would see a healthy participation of many digital companies now coming in and expanding the value proposition of the whole ecosystem towards all of these companies, making it very easy for all of these companies then to come participate and then integrate ecosystem into the mindset, core mindset. And also one core thing that needs to be handled here, which I say for the last, is the whole process of standardization. You need certain assessment body that sort of ensures that the applications that are coming in, the data that is being exchanged, all of these is standardized and certified, and the companies that are participating in the ecosystems follow a certain standard to ensure interoperability in the end. Otherwise, the ecosystems will tend to break apart if the interoperability is lost. And here in this Catena X world, so we have a conformity assessment body set up by big auditors that then every application that wants to go to this app store needs to be standardized and certified. Catena X itself is becoming global now. It started in EU, it went to US. Now you've heard it's starting up in China. So this Japan also becomes a strong use case. India is also being explored right now, and so on and so forth. You see that the network is becoming global now. So accommodating all suppliers throughout the world now. However, ecosystem from these three layers is fine. What is the heart of any ecosystem? These are the participants. So we need to onboard value chains into ecosystems so that they can be connected. Now, diving a little bit deeper into the circularity of battery value chain to the companies in the value chain. So this is the circle. It's a bit colorful, but you see the different entities that are depicted as these nodes in this circular loop. It starts from mining. Mining is the mining companies that start, that dig out the ores from the earth. Then they are refined. Then there's CAM production. CAM means cathode active material. These are the cathode of a battery. Then they are sent to the battery cells. Cells are these like, have you seen in your the cells that you put into the let's say into your toy cars? That they are just bigger in EVs, different chemistry, but conceptually they're the same. Let's say construct, and then they're put together. The cells are packed together to make packs. Packs are given to OEMs. OEMs will put these packs into their cars, bring it to the market. Then users like you and me will buy these cars. We are the first life user. After we have driven the car for a certain amount of time and it doesn't make sense anymore, the battery life has gone significantly down, then the batteries go for repurposing. This could be stationary storage, solar industry, and you name it. Once they're repurposed and goes to the second life, then they can go to recycling. Then recycling will take the CAMs, high voltage batteries are then recycled, and then the recycled materials are pushed back into the loop. And so thereby creating two streams of sourcing materials. And this is the battery circularity that we talked about, that Chaitanya mentioned in the beginning also. And here you clearly see that it's not always a circle. You have this indirection in between, which also makes the whole challenge more complex. Yeah. So often we trivialize this as a chain. It's not a chain, it's a network. Now coming to the battery, let's say the battery passport itself, right? So in order to connect these chains, one use case that we always talk about is the battery passport, Battery Aadhaar. Very simply, think of this as an application, right? So a QR code on the top of the battery pack that somebody can scan and then get some data out of it. This is what it is, quite underwhelming from the front end perspective of it, right? But in order to build such a passport, there's a little bit more needed. So what you see at the bottom is the same value chain that I showed before. And according to the requirements now, the entity that is responsible for putting these batteries to the market is called an economic operator. And they have to collect the data that goes into the passport along the chains. And the data gets built up along the chains till it makes the battery passport. And that really one up and one down push of data, built up of data, entity by entity in the value chain needs to be enabled by the ecosystems. Looking a bit into the data, you see currently the defined battery passport has about 93 attributes that needs to be published, and different categories of data, battery materials, composition, carbon footprint, etc. And you see how these different entities across these value chains provide this data. Each dot is a data attribute, and when the color changes, the value is recalculated. So you literally see how the battery value chain builds up the passport till it reaches an OEM which issues the passport. And that's the complexity. It's not a centralized database. It's not something that an OEM can do it directly by themselves from their secondary data sources, from their ERP systems, etc. And we are always, one aspect is, we talked about the sustainability of battery passport. And then in the beginning, we also alluded to some values that these battery passports can offer. In Europe, we have identified potential use cases of these battery passports, and we can show that along the entire stakeholder chain, the value chain, different entities can gather different types of value. So more interestingly, if you think about this for an end user, when I am buying a car, EV car, a second-hand EV car, the maximum value of the car is in the battery pack, right? So almost 30% of the value of the car is in the battery pack. It would be nice for me to have an informed purchasing decision if I could understand the state of the health of the battery through the passport, and so on and so forth. Logistics, we talked about some of these aspects: reverse logistic, efficient reporting, and all of this makes the battery passport as a use case quite relevant. So we talked about battery passports and their value, but in the end, what we are moving towards is a digital vehicle passport. Battery is just one component of the car, as you see here. Then there's going to be other components, and in the end, as these passports are getting built in Europe, they'll get connected to what is called as a digital vehicle passport. And these vehicle passports then would be one QR code on top of the car. And this is the challenge. We start with the battery regulation, with the battery pack, and where we move towards is the whole car, and then cross industry to all industries, all products in Europe. And that is something that we need to also, as a food for thought, we need to understand that that it is just the beginning, and we should not really work in isolation for battery passport, but think in the ecosystem mindset, because in Europe, Catena X has already agreed upon, which is really a group of almost all OEMs coming together on more use cases on ecosystem than just battery passport, which you see on the left-hand side. And then, of course, our role as Data Space Solutions in the end is to enable all use cases through a unified user experience, making it very easy for the suppliers to get connected, join in the ecosystem, and then generate value. And what we always say is, in order to enable all of these use cases, in order to scale it out, we need to build we call it the data motorway, data expressway, so that the supply chain can simply connect to the OEMs without getting tangled in the complexities of decentralized networks in the technological components that are then pushed through by the digital aspect of the whole challenge here. That was my last slide. Hopefully, I could sort of bring you a little bit closer to the development of the story, right from the regulations, how these ecosystems are getting developed, to the automotive ecosystem. Battery passport being one use case, still very complicated. We call it the monster use case. It's very complicated use case. And then how this battery passport will pave the way to other use cases, other product passports, and then finally bringing in the mindset of ecosystem here and not use case to address these challenges right now as we discuss these topics in India.
Thank you, Dr. Arnav. That was a pretty intense, short 15-minute presentation, but very important takeaways from the presentation. Like you mentioned that the whole of the industry will have to come together to arrive at such a solution, and I'm pretty sure that the government is also as important a stakeholder in the evolution of this system. The 3D image that you showed was a very nice way of visualizing, where we see that there are some interoperable foundations on which the business operations would work, and on top of which there would be a lot of value-added services, which would then be designed on the top of the underlying foundation layers. Pretty interesting, and I'm sure your argument that the battery passport or battery Aadhaar, as we are calling it right now, would have to be looked from a more use cases perspective, and those are the kind of consultations that is happening here. We are trying to identify as a country what all different cases can something like a battery Aadhaar or the battery passport can address. So very good takeaways from your presentations. We'll be hearing you more in the panel discussion. And what Dr. Anwar's presentation also showed that while it may seem relatively easier from the front end, but even from the diagrams that he showed, we should come to understand that the behind the scene architecture is a very complex nut to crack. And that is what we are planning to have a discussion on in our next section. So moving on to our next session, we'll be having a panel discussion on designing the or how the technical framework for a battery Aadhaar in India should look like. So I would like to introduce the panelists. First, we have Mr. Suresh Babu. Suresh Babu is a senior scientist and director at Department of Science and Technology. He is representing the Government of India in the panel. Mr. Alexander, he is the Program Management Officer. He is looking at the Global Electric Mobility Program from UNEP. It's based out of Nairobi. Mr. Anil Radhakrishnan, he is the Chief Product Officer of Tata Elxsi. Tata Elxsi has been involved in developing battery passport solutions, so learnings from his experience would be pretty useful. We have Dr. Praful Chandra. He's a professor and director at the Atria Center for AI and Decentralized Technologies. He's someone who has been working on decentralized technologies in various capacities, and I'm sure his insights would add a lot of value to this discussion. And of course, Dr. Arnav will also be joining for the panel discussion. To take the panel discussion forward, I would like to introduce the moderators for the session. I would like to invite Ms. Chaitanya back to moderate the session, and her co-moderator, I welcome Mr. Abhishek Jain. So Mr. Abhishek Jain is a seasoned digital infrastructure architect, and he has over 2 decades of experience in building open and interoperable systems at scale. He has led the design of global digital public goods in sectors like health and governance. So I'm sure his cross-sector experiences would also add a lot of value to the discussion. So once again, before I hand over the session to Chetan and Abhishek, we have the Q&A session tab at the bottom. just a small request, just have a go at the first half of the session, because it may so happen that many of our questions might be answered during the panel discussion itself. So hold on to our thoughts, and as we approach towards the end of the discussion, please feel free to put in your questions in the Q&A section. So over to you, Chaitanya and Abhishek.
Thanks. Thanks, Anubhav, and I'll just get us started off. So it was great seeing the presentation by Arunav to set the context, right? It really laid everything out at a very foundational level, right? From what that sort of helping us visualize what the necessary architecture is that that we're going to be requiring when we're looking at building out something like as complex as a battery Aadhaar. It comes from everything from regulations to the standards and certifications that are required to verify and validate the data, and the various stakeholders and how the data flows from them, and how the system can be built to enable reliable and safe storage and access to that data. So, and while the EU has done so much of that work, helped set sort of many of those pieces in place, like, what is some of that data that is required for various use cases? I think both the EU battery regulation and the list of data attributes for the EU battery passport, which have been put out by some of the think tanks and the government agencies, help us understand what some of that data requirements might be. At the same time, while we can learn a lot from that, India is a completely different context. India does not have as much experience with due diligence and track and trace systems as the EU does. India does not have as much data capacity or the maybe even the ability to bear some of the cost burdens of the data requirements and the data collection. And many of our battery supply chain, a lot of it is outside the country. So it's a completely different context we're dealing with. At the same time, India also has certain existing technology frameworks or communication protocol or various protocols, connectivity protocols, like the whole digital public infrastructure on which UPI has been built, on which the unified energy infrastructure interface is being envisioned today. So it's also not a blank space into which the battery passport is dropping. So today's discussion, while taking inspiration from the EU, also aims to understand what the requirements for India are. And to start us off, I'd like to actually call upon Mr. Suresh Babu. And because the Department of Science and Technology has been actively supporting the idea and need for a battery Aadhaar for India, it'd be good to understand if you could set the context for us, Mr. Suresh Babu, on what you think the digital identity system like Battery Aadhaar means for India. What are some of the key use cases that you think it will be required to address, and what are the problems we're trying to solve today here in India? Over to you, Mr. Suresh. Mr. Suresh, are you able to speak?
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you, Chaitanya, for posing this question to me. Indeed, I'm thankful to WRI India for inviting me for this seminar. And Battery Aadhaar is very much needed at this point of time. The reason would be that we all know that I think 2 years back, there were a lot of fires within India, especially for 2 and 3 wheelers because of various reasons. And then the government also set up a committee to investigate what went wrong. And what they found was that the raw material that they acquired from different countries were actually inferior in nature. The battery components and the raw material that is used within the cells were inferior in nature. And as a result, there was a catch of fire, and so many vehicles were destroyed. Indeed, the traceability makes an important element for government to ensure safety. Safety becomes the highest priority as far as EVs are concerned. So we must know that where this raw material is coming from. And then safety in terms of even recycling the entire battery. Safe disposal of the battery is also an important priority. And now, considering the number of growth of electric vehicles year by year, now we stand at 7.6% growth, and we are expecting a rapid growth in electric vehicle penetration in the country. And apart from that, grid scale energy storage systems are also coming in a big way. And altogether, we can see number of used batteries that may pile up in the coming years. So how do we trace them? How do you trace them, and how do you recover the critical materials and then safely dispose of the rest of the things? And then when it comes to whether these batteries are useful for repurposing or can be sent directly to recycling, how do we make data-driven decision? So in that case, battery passport makes an important enabler for the industry and also for the government to look at it. And one is actually even the collection of batteries, collection of used batteries. I think most of the recycling industry, they are facing difficulty because tracing and collection of the batteries is also becoming a big challenge. In fact, unified energy interface that was introduced very recently for the charging infrastructure to locate the charging stations and all that. The similar concept can be used to trace the batteries across the value chain and across the country. And also, there is another case where actually, in case of heavy duty vehicles, we use almost 300 kilowatt hour battery capacity for the buses and trucks. And if some of the buses are not in use, a lot of energy will get wasted. So how do we utilize that energy and then maybe through V2G technology, then send back to the grid that energy that can be utilized? So I think ISGF, India Smart Grid Forum, also carried out some kind of trials. And this is also an application where this battery passport or battery Aadhaar will play an important role in tracing this battery. And also setting up guidelines and test parameters based on the data that we acquire through Aadhaar is very important. I think Chaitanya also mentioned when it comes to even developing standards for recycling and repurposing is actually indirectly linked with the data that we acquire through passport. And then, and even if we look at the insurance companies, and how insurance companies and financial institutions, there are a lot of challenges that they are not ready to support the EV industry. And then even 2 days back, I think yesterday I attended a NITI Aayog meeting. There it was discussed that heavy duty vehicles, financing heavy duty vehicles is a big challenge in India. The reason being the amount is very high, and also the financiers are not coming forward. So Battery Aadhaar is very crucial. The data that we acquire through Battery Aadhaar is crucial for financial institutions or insurance people to know and take right decisions. So all of these actually are quite important for the government and also for the industry, for the enabling a good conducive environment and to run the business. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Indeed, government is very serious to take up this and work along with the stakeholders and develop India-specific battery Aadhaar system. Maybe the systems that are there abroad may be suitable in that environment, but we need to work out India-specific battery Aadhaar system, and also the number of attributes we can work out lesser. We may not be going for 90 plus and all that, but whatever is necessary, we can use those, and then we can build different layers within the battery Aadhaar so that security is ensured and not to have any issue with the participating institutions and industries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Suresh. I think you've really laid out the wide sort of range of use cases quite well. And we can see that while I focused on circularity when I started the discussion earlier, there are many other aspects, right, from battery fires, which and there the importance of raw material sourcing comes into the picture. Whereas in Europe, it's been more about ethical raw material sourcing. Here, it is more about the quality of raw material sourcing and how that is impacting our own battery performance and safety in the country, right? And even from what you said, some of the enmeshing of sort of energy flows and data flows from battery is becoming important or becoming apparent in the discussion of the battery passport in India. It's not just about the data flows, but also about how energy flows in the V2G ecosystem or in the UEI ecosystem, and we're talking about peer-to-peer energy sharing. So that's an interesting insight. Thank you. I'd now like to hand off to Abhishek to take us forward with the technical discussion. Over to you, Abhishek.
Thank you, Chaitanya. And thank you, Suresh Babuji. Chaitanya said, right context, why do we need battery passport / Aadhaar in the Indian context, etc. Now, to take it forward more from a what and a how perspective, I would like to first invite Dr. Chandra, Praful Chandra. Dr. Chandra, my question to you is basically you've been part of very early pilots of the battery passports. So you've seen this by doing it, not just by kind of understanding it. Hello. So basically three main questions. One is if you could share some of the key lessons from the efforts that India and the whole ecosystem which is working towards battery passport needs to keep in mind while designing it for our context. Secondly, as Chaitanya mentioned, and I think Suresh Babuji also mentioned about the existing digital infrastructure, not just the infrastructure, but the thinking that we have around DPGs and the DPIs, like openness, interoperability, decentralized trust, etc. How important that would be to make it work for India, and maybe because this has come up a couple of times, also add in a view on how important it is to be globally interoperable while locally contextual. So if you could kind of throw lights on those three aspects, Dr. Chandra.
Thank you, Mr. Abhishek. Thank you for inviting me to the discussion. I think the three questions that you asked are probably spot on, and I think we should address them in that order. So let me start with the first one. I'm sure Dr. Arunav will resonate with me that the problem of building a data sharing solution across multiple enterprises is much more an ecosystem building challenge than it is a technical challenge. All credit to Dr. Arunav that they have been able to pull together the whole supply chain of the automotive industry in the European Union to be able to do this. It's very hard, right? Before I joined the academia, I was an entrepreneur, and we tried to do the same thing. And we, in fact, launched the first car passport in India with one of the car manufacturers. But getting the ecosystem going is very, very, very hard, primarily because the incentives are not aligned. And the person who has to spend the money to build the passport is not the entity which gains from the passport. One of the lessons that we learned when we launched the car passport was that the role of the regulator is extremely critical. And unless you have a regulation to support something like a battery passport, it's lost hope. We should not even try something like this unless it comes from the regulator. So I think that's the first big lesson, that unless you kind of get the regulator involved, it's not going to go anywhere. The second lesson that we learned from that thing was that we should align with standards. And I think that's the second question that you asked, Abhishek. What are the standards? Now, in India, let me take a step back. A lot of the passport thinking came from the blockchain and the Web3 space, right? The Web3 people, the blockchain people were looking for critical use cases. If you remember the early days of blockchain, where we worked on supply chain, and Walmart put out some use cases for traceability. IBM tried to do a lot of work on international supply chains and tracing materials. And a lot of the thinking from there comes and gets adopted into building these ecosystems. And Dr. Arnav talked about automobile ecosystems. Similar initiatives were tried for pharma, again in European Union, but there again, the support was not there from the regulator. So we'll have to kind of be very careful about what the regulator directs us to do. Now, when we look at what is happening in the Indian ecosystem, last month, the Ministry of Power has released a paper on what is called the India Energy Stack, right? A lot of the themes that we are discussing here have been addressed in the India Energy Stack paper. It is less a technological framework, more a white paper on the desirability and the guidelines for what India Energy Stack should look like. It references the India Stack very often, and I think there are lessons that we can derive from the references to India Stack to kind of say what makes sense for India, right? So I think those two pillars, regulator and India Energy Stack, are the first two answers. Now, double clicking on this and driving slightly deeper into what a technology framework in India could potentially look like. I think we should start with what are the requirements, right? What is it that we are trying to do? And even though we are using Battery Aadhaar and Battery Passport interchangeably, we have to be very careful, right? Aadhaar was an identity system, right? Yes, the India Stack did build multiple layers on top of Aadhaar to enable data sharing, but the Aadhaar and passport are two fundamentally different ideas. And let's spend a minute or two talking about why they are different. Aadhaar is fundamentally a number which is allocated to you, which uniquely identifies you, accompanied with a digital backbone which allows eKYC, right? Which allows verification of your identity. It's an identity verification system and an identity allocation system. So keep that in mind. And now think about what a passport should look like, right? What are the key characteristics of a passport? Yes, it's an identity system, right? When the government issues you a passport, it's an identity for sure, but it does multiple other things. The passport is an access control right, which means nobody can write into the passport unless they are authorized to do so, right? So the only entities who are authorized to write into the passport are immigration centers of different countries. So it's an access control right? It's a sacred document. Even you cannot modify your own passport. So what we are looking for is a data store which has an access control right, where only certain entities can write into that digital store of data. Third, it is a privacy controlled read. All the data in the passport belongs to you. And it is your decision as the owner of the passport who to share the data with. So it's a privacy control read data store. Fourth, there has to be a way for the entity to whom you are showing the data to be able to verify that this is authentic. This is what happens when an immigration officer, when you travel outside, takes your passport and scans it. So there has to be a digital mechanism to verify the authenticity of the data that you are sharing. Fifth, there has to be a consent-based architecture to prove that data was shared by you to a third party if they are using it, right? All these are requirements. Now, what is interesting is that India Stack has addressed all of these. And in the digital public infrastructure of India, we have solutions for all of these. All these solutions exist in the financial sector. For example, we have the account aggregator framework in digital public infrastructure, which allows your consent, based on your consent, data to be shared between two banks who are custodians of your financial data. We have also the DigiLocker, which becomes a government provided store where you can store your own architecture. We have eKYC, which allows verification, digital verification, cryptographic verification of stuff that of the data that is being showed. So I think all of these exist. I think the fundamental question for us is, if we were to start and adopt this in India, how would these things need to be identified and mapped to the energy sector and specifically the battery sector? I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Abhishek.
And I think there are some very, very interesting constructs that you brought to the table. I think one very important being differentiation between Aadhaar, which is an identity system, and a passport, which is much more than an identity system. And the fact that the information on the passport can be added multiple times only by the verifiable entities, and then the owner of the passport has the right to show it or not. So I think all of those aspects need to build up, brought up. So that's thank you for that. Another very interesting, maybe a topic for discussion for some other time would be that like whether it is regulator driven or regulator catalyzed ecosystem that we are talking about. Because if it is completely regulator driven, it looks very different than if it is just a regulator catalyzed ecosystem. So thank you for bringing that, and that also kind of helps me take this forward to our next panelist, Mr. Anil. Basically, my question to you, going from where Dr. Chandra left it, Mr. Anil, would be around how does industry adopt to it, and what are industries need around this? So, for example, what will you consider as important digital building blocks needed? Given that you've seen it both outside and you play an important role here in India also. What could go wrong if these pieces don't align well? Professor like Chandra talked about multiple pieces which exist in financial ecosystem in India, and some of them can be bought over either directly or through some kind of extensions of those. But what happens if they are not, if the whole design is not thought through well and they don't align well? And then how all of this, and I think Suresh Babuji also referred to it, how can all of this be done in Indian context without overburdening the industry? Because we also need to understand the state of our industry and the digital readiness of many of our ecosystem players. So over to you, Mr. Anil.
Thanks, Abhishek. I hope I'm audible, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So again, first, I would like to really appreciate Dr. Praful to setting up that clear differentiation between a passport and an Aadhaar. Because when we were working with WRI, a few months back in terms of what is that we wanted to, where do we want to start the journey? What is that we wanted to really demonstrate to kickstart this whole thinking? Our intention was to start with an identity because, the passport is a much more complex, beast altogether. But we have that experience of that Aadhaar, very familiar term. So can we have the digital identity first established? It has got a very limited number of fields to be displayed to the public, but it gives an identity for a battery what is being rolled out in the market. Start with that, and then start evolving or start iterating from there. What further data point are really required if it has to really bring in the upstream as well as the value to the downstream. Sorry, value generation through the downstream. So that was one clear good differentiator what you brought in, because that's very important. Now, during that course of the conversation, what we also realized is, see, India, our supply chain sometimes, most of the time is lying outside of India, number one. Second one is we also have export market, right? We do make products here and then export it either to Europe or some of the Asia regions, right? So what are the considerations if we really wanted to put a digital backbone infrastructure? Because we really need to be connecting with the rest of the world. I mean, if there is a passport happening in Europe and tomorrow, we might be sourcing sometime from some of the APAC countries, but exporting will be happening to the Europe. And how do we really have a seamless flow of information, flowing in this whole pipe, what we are going to lay down? So that was one thing which we noted down. And the second one is now what are the use cases which are very specific for India? Because India is a cost sensitive market. We have two-wheeler, three-wheeler, passenger, commercial vehicles. If we start going behind hunting for the data, we don't know till what level, what layers we can really, go up, right? So your passport, not the Aadhaar, the passport is as good as the amount of quality of data it contains and the amount of data, the validity of the data, what it is really holding. It's like a garbage in, garbage out, right? So considering and there is no regulation which is really saying that, quality of data has to be this way and it has to be really maintained for so many months, years, who is going to be the custodian of the data, what is the penalty of having, a fraudulent data which has been pushed into the system, what should be the, common denominator around which this data should be available so that some meaningful interpretation can be done out of the data. So there is quite a lot of things to be defined if we really need to be having a successful use case which has to come out. Are these unique for India? May not be. Other countries also will face it, but definitely, the spread of the segment of what we operate in India. So availability of data, quality of data, and processing, and then making it more meaningful for the concept to work is one thing which we thought we need to be factored in. And it is, as Professor was mentioning, it is as Praful was mentioning, it is not a technology nightmare. It is more about having the clarity and having the priority in terms of what is the problem we are trying to solve, and what is the right infrastructure as well as the protocols we should be really bringing into the the digital solution. And should we be copying what is happening in Europe, or should we have make it built what it really meant for our infrastructure and our needs. So these were some of the considerations which we were piecing together. But what was demonstrated as a part of that Kickstart exercise was creating a digital identity with a layered data access protocol to say, hey, look, this is what a public can see. This is what a recycler can see. This is what a repurposer can see. Bringing in some elements of blockchain. And the intention was to say that, look, I mean, we need to start thinking about it, and regulator has got a role to play. And DST was definitely very proactive enough to come forward to, start extrapolating that whole conversation and taking it to a wider context. So, and from the industry point, the most important thing is from the data point, in the sense who is going to be eventually the custodian of this data, because there is a cost which is going to be associated in terms of managing this data. Is it going to be the industry, or are there going to be any guidelines going to come in? Because sometimes this data can be create a positive use case as well as a negative use case, right? One example is, look, from the data, I can decide what should be a personalized insurance plan which I should be giving it to a user based on the driving patterns or charging, discharging, or some of those battery insights. But the same set of data, I can also use it to raise a challan to the user. Look, I mean, this also says me that, look, you're not driving it properly. So now, how do you really want to handle it? So who should be having an access? Can we have certain guidelines defined in terms of access rights, and how we should be really going about in terms of exposing the data to the downstream partners. So these are some of the thought process which was also coming in from the industry, and definitely a lot of expectation is there with the regulatory team from the regulation side, at least a guideline in terms of how are we really seeing upstream and the downstream going to be play out, and what are going to be the the security guidelines, the bare minimum infrastructure guidelines, and what is the expectations and responsibilities of a OEM slash manufacturer slash digital infrastructure provider to sign up and make this a success, right? So these are some of the the thoughts which is happening around in this space, Abhishek.
Abhishek, sorry,
Oh, no,
if I may
Yep.
jump in for a minute.
Yeah, please.
I mean,
Please.
bad news for you. All of it is coming to you. The data custodian will be the vehicle manufacturer. The responsibility of taking consent will be your responsibility. And I'm saying this all based on drawing parallels from the financial sector. So it's all going to come to you.
True. Yeah, we know it, which way the wind will blow. But at the moment, as you said, what is really important is laying down those guidelines very clearly so that everyone knows what is that we are signing up to.
All right, and thank you for bringing that, and thank you, Professor Chandra, for bringing that aspect. But I think some of the things that come to mind while Anil was speaking was mainly right. One is given the supply chain of the whole battery system, it may not be as easy to just take what exists and fit in to the patterns, because many of the things, the earlier things that we have done may be very contextual to India, and it's not so often interoperating with the across boundary stuff. So yeah, we will need to think through that. also straddling this, how much contextualization versus how much global interoperability will be a good challenge. Like recently, and like one of my major efforts have been into health, and these are the same questions which we've been or the same challenges we've been kind of dealing with in health also. Wherein it's not just about technology, but also bringing the whole ecosystem together with their motivations being not immediately aligned. Of course, it takes a little bit of a ecosystem overhauling to do those alignment of motivations, etc. And then also all of these factors, which both Professor Chandra and Anil spoke about. Thank you so much both. I think you've given enough fodder for thought for maybe another webinar and another panel discussion on this. But with that, I think I'd like to invite back Chaitanya for the next question.
Sure. Thanks, Abhishek. I'm going to switch up the order a little bit here because while we were going to go to Mr. Alexander right now, I wanted to pick up where Abhishek left off, Mr. Alex. So just give us one moment as we turn to Dr. Arunav again. So Dr. Arunav, I think Abhishek was talking about sort of how the supply chain spans across the globe, right? And there are different capacities, there are different entities with different capacities across the entire value chain in terms of being able to supply this data flow. And when we're talking about decentralized data systems, we're talking about every company, every small company along the value chain being able to do this at a moment's notice, at a moment's call. And so having the systems to be able to do that, the capacities to be able to do that. What are some of the challenges you're encountering in this, given how globalized Europe's battery value chain is? And are there any lessons for countries like India also to learn, both in terms of supporting the companies along the value chain, as well as having the bargaining power to be able to demand data across borders?
Great. Thanks for that question, Chaitanya. So I think Dr. Chandra already alluded one of the biggest challenges, which is getting the companies participate in the whole initiative, right? So in the end, we're talking about, so how do we connect companies? How do we incentivize the companies to get connected first, then exchange any data on top of it, right? So in the end, whatever system we design, whatever system we plan, we need to make it an incentivization process. One ramification that we are talking about. Think about, let's take the European context for a second. So let's say an OEM, which is then the legal economic operator responsible for bringing the passport, asks the data from tier 1 and says, hey, you have to now implement this digital service in your company because the regulation needs it. So then the tier 1 will ask the tier 2 will ask the tier 3. So this added overhead of running digitalization, how do the companies cover that cost? By making their products more expensive. So the cost will cascade down till the OEM, in the end consumers will have more expensive cars, right? So in the end, you need to, when we are talking about requirements and aspects and properties of these type of decentralized approaches, we need to make an incentivization model for the companies to then come in and sort of participate and have opportunities to also make impacts to their top line, bottom line, so that they can carry the cost. So the ecosystem has to be self-sustainable. That is one of the biggest challenges we are facing right now, is exactly to bring them together. And then really one approach that we are taking is, as I said in the presentation also a little bit, it's not about one use case. You can't talk about one aspect of the entire problem. As a supplier to automotive, it doesn't matter where I am. If I am using a digital system and investing cost into bringing that digital system into my company, I need to develop, generate more value by reusing it for other aspects. And this is also something that we are sort of looking into. What are the other sub aspects of the passport, like product carbon footprint reporting, like material composition reporting? So I think there was also a point in recycling reuse where they will benefit tremendously if the passport already gives them the information of what is the composition of the battery is, so that they can recycle or reuse better. The health state of the battery, which goes into the passport, which will give me a direct information by connecting the BMS, battery management systems of the car, which is giving me information about should I buy this car now or not? So I can scan a QR code and then through the passport, I get these type of information. So we need to bring in these type of, let's say, added benefits, added value proposition for then sort of making the whole setup, self-sustaining. That is the challenge that we are facing right now. And the other aspects, I think, Praful also very nicely listed down great requirements that also was in the thought process of putting these down. One thing is also what Anil said is these supply chains are also global and they need to be interoperable. So yes, there are challenges in the Indian context, but it needs to be operable with, I don't know, a German passport, a French passport, or a European passport, an American passport. There's a California law that is coming in. There's that Brazil will put their own laws. There's the laws in China, and then this needs to be a global, let's say, interoperable system that then sort of gets easily plugged into that context. Over transparency is definitely, so garbage in, garbage out is a very good point. It's a very important point. And this is why you saw this complicated pictures when you think about passport, where the data is directly collected from the source company and moved. So the passport, very important, Aadhaar as an identity, passport gets stamped for a battery. Battery comes downstream. So when the complexity of the business model is as follows. Battery will come 6 months down the line. There is no battery, but the mining companies are sending ores. The refining companies are sending batches, and so on and so forth. So battery is getting built in a process, and then the battery comes out at the end. So if you go back and then create tracing after a battery is built, then it will not work. So it should follow the material flow, should follow the digital collection of the data right from the source, so that then an OEM will ask the tier 1, hey, give me your attributes, where it already contains the tier 2's data, which already contains the tier 3's data. And this is why the over transparency could be prevented, because I am only giving data to my customer and collecting data from my supplier. And I ensure that the data is correct and keeping a traceability. And that is sort of some of the challenges that we are facing to implement the trust framework right now at different levels. And then ensure that over transparency is not, so the attributes, we talked about attributes also a little bit, what attributes should go in, so that over transparency is not created in the passport and affecting some businesses that might actually create problems in the market.
Thanks,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Arun.
Take for a minute here, Chaitanya.
Sure.
Yeah, I think thanks for bringing it, and Professor Chandra brought it in the beginning. There is also going to be this challenge of, see, passport is a claim, but that claim has to stand the physical ground of battery actually matching the data of the passport, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's much more complicated in that way, and I think it was so nice to see that Europe thinking about it in a sequential chain, where every party kind of deals with only upstream and downstream, and not everyone is dealing with everyone. But thanks. I mean, lots to think about. Back to you, Chaitanya.
Thanks, Abhishek, and thanks, Dr. Aruna, for that as well. I think, and the way we are seeing it evolve also, I think it's definitely it takes time to build the capacities, and to be able to build in that time and make it maybe a graded approach would be essential, especially when we're starting from scratch. And some of the other speakers have also referred to the need for regulation to also enable some of this, and that becomes clearer with Dr. Praful's point on how do we impel different companies to participate.
So I would really like to assert that regulation is a starting point.
Yeah.
And then has to be regulation, because it needs to be a pressure in the market to get into the initiatives. Regulation is the starting point, and then the pressure from the economic operator OEMs will trickle down to the supply chain to really then enable these supply chains.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Arnav. Now I'd like to call in Mr. Alexander from UNEP. So, Mr. Alexander, from your perspective as a global environmental organization, you have worked in various contexts of the developing world. The battery passport as a concept is emerging from the EU, but it could have multiple applications and challenges in the developing economies context. I think India's working with it, understanding how it needs to be applied in India is one starting point for the developing world as well to start grappling with this idea. But from your perspective, how do you see the passport being useful for some of the developing economies as part of the global supply chains and as receivers of some of the finished products of these global supply chains? Over to you.
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for having me here. Maybe maybe I want to provide a little bit more context. Why is UNEP participating in a discussion like this? So we are running what we call the Global Electric Mobility Program. That Global Electric Mobility Program is led by UNEP out of Nairobi, and we are actually implementing, together with partners, e-mobility projects in 57 low and middle income countries around the world, implementing a total of about $170 million in grants in these country projects. So what are these country projects doing? They're essentially working on laying the sort of ground for having workable e-mobility systems in low and middle income countries in Africa, in Asia Pacific, in Latin America and the Caribbean, around the world. So in these projects, it is actually a lot about developing policies and regulations to sort of establish the basis for successful e-mobility rollout. That can be fiscal policies, but there's also a lot of sort of regulatory work being done, and there's work being done on the topic of used electric vehicle import, on the topic on battery end of life, on the topic on circularity. And as Dr. Arunav just said, setting the regulatory framework is very important, and setting this regulatory framework not only in those countries and regions which are producing electric vehicles at scale, but also in countries in the global south, which will either also locally produce and assemble vehicles, but which will also import a lot of vehicles into their countries. So of course, we are not doing this work alone. We are doing this work, for example, with partners like WRI India, with other UN agencies, with the development banks, also getting the finance into these projects through working with ADP, through working with World Bank, through working with other entities. When I'm saying that we are actually implementing projects in 57 countries right now, I think we are in a very good position to also participate in such a discussion, how to harmonize standards, how to organize exchange between countries and sub-regions on all sorts of topics, among which, for example, the battery passport. So we are now developing a new program which is dedicated only on that entire idea of used electric vehicles, battery end of life, and circularity in low and middle income countries. And I think I just needed to provide this background to answer a little bit this question: what are we doing here? So now back to the question: how do we see battery passport being useful in the developing world context? I mean, first and foremost, the question in the sort of low and middle income countries in global south, what to do with batteries at their end of life, versus the question in, let's say, European Union, India, US, China, wherever, is the same. The sort of overarching target is how to get as much of the precious materials which are in a battery, in an EV battery, back into the global value chain to make new EV batteries out of it. And while this question of circularity is already addressed within, or is starting to be addressed, or is at different levels of being addressed in the producing regions, the EU, India, China, addressing the question what happens with all those vehicles which either are being imported in global south countries in the form of new vehicles, talking about 2- and 3-wheelers, talking about buses, or in the form of used electric vehicles. Maybe or a lot of global south countries will import a significant amount of used cars, for example. How now to make sure that at the end of the battery life in a car, maybe a second life of a battery in a stationary application, maybe some sort of repurposing of battery cells coming from cars, for example, going into motorcycles, there's a lot of different trajectories, but at the end of the day, the material shall go back into the refineries, building the new batteries. And for this purpose, a battery passport, as it is discussed in India, as it is discussed in Europe, is actually crucial, because what has been mentioned before, having the traceability from cradle to grave, is the only way of enabling that chain can be closed. So very simple answer to the question, how important is it to the global south? It is very important. Yeah, it is very important. Not only now, the aspect of circularity is one aspect where it is very important, making sure that the materials are going back into the global value chain. The second important aspect is, which I just sort of touched upon a little bit, by saying many global south countries will import used electric vehicles. If you look at sub-Saharan African car markets, then you will see a lot of countries where about 90% of the cars being sold in the country are actually used cars, used exported vehicles. Now, in the case of electric vehicles, it will be very, very important to decide what can be exported from the originating sort of regions. And that can be India, that can be China, that can be Europe, that can be the US. What shall be allowed for export in terms of used vehicles for a second life as used vehicles in Southeast Asian countries, in African countries, in Latin American countries. And here again, the battery passport with all the information which Dr. Anuruv showed so nicely at the beginning, with like some end user applications, where now you get a valid sort of objective idea about what is the state of health of that battery. And that sort of data contained in such a passport will be very crucial to now enable customs or whoever is controlling in the global south what can enter the country, or in the global north what is allowed to leave the country, to take that decision. This vehicle can be exported, that vehicle shall be not exported, and will not add value to the import countries. Yeah, so I think, again, very important second aspect to the battery passport, not only on circularity, but also on the decision taken, what shall be eligible in terms of used vehicle import. And maybe a third aspect is, as much as many global south countries are interested in scaling up the market for electric vehicles, because they see a lot of use in it, for example, use of local electricity instead of imported petroleum. But they're also asking us, what are we doing with these batteries at the end of the day? Yeah? And again, it is an enabling sort of instrument to let global south countries participate in electrification. So I think that is a third very important aspect of a battery passport. It will answer the question, what will I be doing with a used battery at the end of its life? So yeah, I think that would be my couple of ideas on the question how battery passports are being useful in the developing world context. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alex. I think that's helped us kind of zoom back out into what real world implications there are when it comes to global geopolitics and global value chains of the batteries, and how different countries may have different requirements. I mean, it may even be if there are no local capacities for recycling and reuse, how they can extract the best value from the global markets when it comes to their used battery assets as well, right? And some of the points you've made on making sure materials go back into the global value chain, and any kind of making sure countries have controls on their exports when it comes to used vehicle markets. These are all incredibly important, and highlight beyond the domestic imperatives, there are also certain global imperatives for the battery passport ecosystem. I'd like to thank all the panelists. I would like to just call upon one person who's not a panelist, who's been a participant, but Mr. Ravindra Kumar from ARAI, the Automotive Research Association of India. When we had put out the word on the webinar, they had let us know that ARAI, along with IIT Madras, has been working on some research regarding a battery Aadhaar for India. And we wanted to just take a moment to invite them, Mr. Ravindra Kumar, to take 3-4 minutes and just give us a brief overview, Mr. Ravindra Kumar, of your research and what's happening, and what you can share at this stage, as we know that it is still under development. Over to you, Mr. Ravindra Kumar.
Yeah, thanks, Chaitanya. So am I audible?
Yes, you're audible and
Yeah.
visible.
So I'll share the 2-3 slide I prepare just to tell about the brief of this project. So I'll share those.
Dr. Kumar, if you could keep it just to 2-3 minutes though.
Yeah, it will not be more than that. Yes.
Thank you so much.
So you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, COJAD and ARI, COJAD at IIT Madras and ARI is working on one of the projects like development of guideline for implementation of Battery Aadhaar system. So basically, this project was identified in the e-mobility R&D roadmap, which was published by PSA office in last year, July. So I'll give you the brief detail. So why battery Aadhaar is required for India? So we have studied that EU battery passport and then considering the different use cases. Now on the slides, you can see on that left hand side, we have shown the data for India EV sale in 2024. And on the right hand side, you can see this data for EU. So main difference you can see here, in India mainly India EV market is dominated by two-wheeler and three-wheeler. So 95% vehicles are two-wheeler and three-wheeler, as against the Europe data, where you can see that mainly car is mainly dominated by car. It's 85% market of EV is dominated by car. So now if you see that in India, market is dominated by two-wheeler and three-wheeler. So over 90% of the India's EV population comprises two-wheeler and three-wheeler, with battery costs ranging from 25,000 to rupees 25,000 to 75,000. So now maintaining such a system, such a EU battery system similar to battery passport, it will be very will not be feasible, may not be feasible for Indian condition, because finally we are putting a cost to the end user, and that two-wheeler battery cost is very low, and in percentage wise, if you consider, it will come to the end user. So now what we thought, instead of directly working on the battery passport, we should have a similar system which will be simple and easily affordable for India specific requirement. So now in this project, we are proposing a battery Aadhaar concept which will be scalable to all type of batteries while maintaining quality and traceability. And it will be very cost effective. So now just a minute. Yeah. So what methodology we have used here? We have approach here. Now we are proposing a hybrid approach. In this approach, we are proposing like there will be alpha numerical code, and along with alphanumerical code, there will be a QR code and server-based approach. So overall parameter, whatever they are in the battery passport, we have benchmarked the battery passport, and then we have divided all those parameters into 3 groups. So mainly 2 groups, fixed parameter and variable parameter, and then we further divided fixed parameter into 2 groups, like it's an alphanumerical number and a QR code. So now on right hand side, you can see that there is a number and a QR code. So some of the why we have divided it, because parameters was huge, so it was like mandatory to divide those parameters into 2 groups. So now what this alphanumerical number content is a unique alphanumerical code which will be assigned to each battery pack. Each character represents the specific parameter of the battery pack. So unlike battery passport, here will be an alphanumerical code, and each uh, digit or each character of that number have some meaning. So by looking at the number itself, using some manual or guideline, any users can identify that various parameter of this battery. So those are the essential parameter. So this code can be interpreted using this user manual or guideline. So if you see on the right hand side, we have specified the stakeholder, where the stakeholder for this alphanumerical code is a manufacturer, government authority, an importer, distributor, service provider, recycler, and end user. Now the parameter which we are not covering in this alphanumerical code, so QR code will be assigned, and all the parameter other than this alphanumerical parameter will be covered in QR code. So parameter which are mainly essential for recycler will come into the QR code parameter. So here you can see the stakeholders are manufacturer, government authority, service provider, and recycler. So if you scan that QR code, it will give you the parameter which are not there, we have not considered in the alphanumerical code. So you'll get all the parameter, and most of the parameter fixed parameter will get using this alphanumerical code and this QR code. So the variable parameters, so some of the parameters are variable, which like you can say that battery life or state of health or something like that, type of the use of the battery, like is first life or second life, or is that condition of the battery. So some minimal parameter we can cover under this variable parameter concept, where the stakeholder, you can see again this manufacturer, government authority, service provider, and recycler. So why we are proposing is a hybrid approach. So it's easy to maintain, and it will not involve much cost, will not involve in maintaining all this approach, this battery Aadhaar number or something like that. Or so alphanumerical number is essential. So whatever essential parameter will be there, it will be in alphanumerical code. And other than alphanumerical parameters, the rest parameter, whatever is required for recycler, can be in the QR code. So
Dr. Yeah, if we can wrap up.
it's the last slide. Yeah. So what are the different features of this projects? These features we are considering. It's a battery Aadhaar can align with Indian policy framework. So then offline traceability of the battery pack will be useful for recycler, collector, and authorities. Limited use of secure server infrastructure for authorities. Dynamic updates with scalable for future upgradation. So we can further scale up this dynamic parameters approach. And then it can support for battery safety, extended producer responsibility, compliance in India, then circular economy and digital sustainability. Yeah, that's all from my side. Yeah. So basically, I cannot share much information here because this is in final stage and it is under review at different stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that little bit. I think the idea of an offline component to the data is very interesting and well suited for India's ecosystem. So I think and we look forward to seeing the results of this research and seeing how we as an ecosystem can help build on it and take it further. I would now, I'm hoping the panelists can stay for another 5 to 10 minutes to answer questions. Is there anyone who's unable to stay? All right, great. So I'm assuming that's a yes. So with that, Anubhav, over to you to take us through some of the questions. I know we have a lot of questions in the Q&A. We may not be able to get to all of them, but some of the more interesting ones. Over to you, Anubhav.
Yeah, thank you, Chaitanya. I'm sure that the topic is so interesting and complex that even if we had 1 extra hour, we would still be looking for time. So, okay, so we have some interesting questions here. The first that I would like the panelists to take on is, so the question says, how do we ensure the whole supply chain data to be valid on a blockchain? So I guess this also introduced the question of, is blockchain being investigated for such a technology? I would invite Dr. Praful if he could share his opinions on the blockchain and is supplying and is data. Is it possible to have this data on a blockchain, and is blockchain valid for a system like Battery Aadhaar?
Sure. Thanks, Anubhav. So I think the data will not go on a blockchain, right? Just because of privacy reasons. However, a digital signature verifying the authenticity of the data can potentially go on a blockchain. I think that's an interesting strategy, especially to address the points that I think both Mr. Anil and Dr. Arnav mentioned. I think we have to keep in mind that the digital public infrastructure of India is sovereign to India. right? And you could potentially argue for a solution where within India, we rely on a DPI-like system which emulates the India stack in the India energy stack. And when you cross boundaries, then you switch over to a public blockchain-based data model for verification. I think that's the way I would kind of put my bets in. But even when you are using the blockchain to authenticate or verify the data, which travels across international boundaries and cannot use the India stack for geopolitical reasons, the data would continue to sit with the data custodian in their servers. The blockchain will primarily be a way to issue a certificate or an authentic verification mechanism to make sure that the receiving parties can validate that the data is credible.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Chanda, for your thoughts. Dr. Arunav, I'm sure Europe has also, explored the idea of blockchain. Quickly, your thoughts on what Europe has found out about blockchain.
Gets quite expensive quite quickly. So in the end, so what the larger questions about trust and the traceability, and the whole point is passport should be immutable. It cannot be changed. It couldn't be. So the hyperledger part of a blockchain could be used in principle to keep track of who issued what data when to the passport, and that's the only component that makes sense. But there is also a concept of verifiable credentials that are now being brought into the whole network, where there would be trust agencies that would issue trust certificates or verifiable credentials, because we need somebody to vet the data also. We need to vet the identity, vet the data, in order to really keep a realistic traceability track. Because what happens is, let's take one use case. If, let's say, there's a recall of, let's say, 1,000 cars that are happening from the market from a certain OEM. Now, there's a faulty part in it. You need to be able to trace back where the fault actually happened. And that is also another use case for battery passport through this traceability. And there you need to really ensure that the data provided during the manufacturing of the battery passport is actually the correct one and it's not changed somehow. The trust in the whole setup needs to be brought in. So, yeah. Cost, number one, as a big driver for these decisions. Second is, different other methods already available.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sure the verification of data, which is essential to implement the trust factor in this entire system, is going to be one of the most complex challenges that Europe has explored. I'm sure India is going to explore further. So moving on to the next question. Okay, so we have a question. Is it just the supply chain data on the passport, or we are going to record even the live data? So what's the Web3 stack recommended? So Mr. Anil, if you can just come in, since you've been talking to some of the vehicle OEMs here. Is it just going to be static data, the supply chain data, or it's also going to be the live data?
So there are going to be dynamic data, because at the end of the day, the static data just represents a few parameters, and the real value comes in when you really blend your static data with your dynamic data, right? So data is like your voltage, right? I mean, effectively your battery eventually is going to throw out a limited set of data, but they are very high valuable. Once it's properly processed, it is going to give you numerous good use cases, right? Your state of health, state of charge, your charging, discharging cycles, then your temperature, your internal resistance, right? And then your voltage aspects of the battery. These are some of those very critical parameters. And typically what happens in almost all the EV vehicles, there is going to be a BMS, right? And this is going to be thrown onto the central vehicle platform, which again is going to be there with most of the vehicles, right? So it's not about the availability of data. It's about now what's the frequency in which you wanted to collect the data, because each one is going to be a cost element, right? If you wanted to have it at 5 minutes versus 5 seconds, it's a cost, right?
Yeah.
So how do you really wanted to get the best out of the data, and what should be that use case, which is the industry is looking for, is one of the critical parameters which we need to factor in. But yeah, so to answer it, it's not the static. There is a bunch of dynamic data which has to really come in.
Yeah.
When
And
you
I'm sure,
blend-
sorry.
So when you blend this dynamic with static, you will see quite a lot of nice internal patterns which can come in. So you can see whether, do you see any anomalies in the supply chain based on, the faster, based on some of those corner cases you see when you analyze the data, right? A supply chain clustering you can do, right? Your testing has it been sufficiently been tested based on this dynamic data as you can do. It's quite a lot beautiful use cases you can build, but it's a mix of static and dynamic.
Yeah. And I'm sure recording live data and then eventually sharing of that data is also going to help in the evolution of business cases out of it. As you
Absolutely.
said, some different people might have customized requirements of that data. And
Correct.
that is where probably we might see some business cases evolving out of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. So basically your battery is abused or is it well used, well maintained? Correct. All of this, you will be able to start inferring it once you start analyzing this dynamic data.
Yeah. Thanks for the input. In fact, we have a sort of a follow-up question from there is that do we see then requirements of certain hardwares to record such data and making it available on Battery Aadhaar, some use of telematics or other onboard hardware, or we are good with that? What's been your conversations, Anil?
Yeah, so I would say, as I said, the BMS is definitely a rich source of data to begin with, correct? And and it has to be there, and it will be there in most of the EV batteries, or most of the batteries which is rolled out, right? So as such, there is no need for a separate hardware to be installed to start pulling in some of this data point, unless whether we invent a corner use case and we start inventing the problem and start coming with a solution. But for the first phase or the first value to realization to happen, the current infrastructure and the current data pipe should be good enough. Now it all depends on in terms of, as I said, the frequency of data, the storage of the data, what are we really going to do with this data? It all really matters around that space. That's how I see it.
Okay, thanks for the input. Moving on to the next question. Okay, so this actually goes back to again Dr. Arnav, but it will be
one point
sure.
I want to share is that suppose actually BMS will do most of the job, but when it comes to sharing of data between different peer-to-peer, between maybe what we were talking about, interoperable solution that we can bring in at later stage. I think even Dr. Arnava also was mentioning that maybe when we export our batteries to other countries, so between countries, whatever battery passports or battery Aadhaars we have, so and data exchange has to happen. In that case, maybe I don't know, Mr. Anil has to correct me. The cloud-based systems also need to be utilized for storing the data and transferring, because it is API exchanges and all that. So
you're right. So the what I mentioned was there is a BMS which is available from our data from to get the battery data. But as I also was mentioning that most of the vehicles are having a connected cloud now, right? Which is usually based in either one of the hyperscalers deployed, right? So that's where you are really going to transport the data and then start making use of the data. So of course, yeah, you're right. The BMS and this centralized data push is really required if we need to make the best use of it. Because these are not edge use cases we are talking. These are all use cases which has to be processed elsewhere outside of the vehicle.
Sureshi, if one question, if you could take, so there's a question which asks that recyclers are the ones which are applications where the recycler needs to feed in the data to a battery Aadhaar, say from a regulatory compliance way or any other way. What are those things that you're seeing where the recycler needs to fit into the battery Aadhaar?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, in between, I think there was a pause when you spoke.
So the question is, what kind of input do you see the recyclers making into the battery Aadhaar? So what are those cases, maybe from a regulatory point of view or from any other use cases? But what are those examples you see where the recycler needs to feed some data into the battery Aadhaar, because we have been talking about data fed so that the recycler can use. What is it that the recycler can add to the battery Aadhaar data?
In fact, one thing is that when we talk about critical materials extraction, so this will happen at the end of the value chain, where recyclers will be doing this job, whether it is production of black mass and then converting them into for useful applications and all that. So definitely from the end point where actually recyclers can give feedback, provide the information to the battery Aadhaar. So from that particular battery, how much critical minerals have been extracted and all that. That's what I feel. And that is one thing. And also when we look at EPR rules and regulations, so there is a need to provide end-to-end data, both from the OEM side and then from the recycler side, how actually they have interacted and how the information flow happens, because government will take account of that. So from the critical minerals extraction point of view, some data will definitely go into that. And apart from that, one more thing is that the battery Aadhaar can help in the recycling industry, is that nowadays actually different types of batteries are coming, whether it is LFP, NMC, or sodium ion, solid state. Solid state is yet to come. So the thing is that recyclers will be able to identify what type of chemistry it is, and then they may decide that what kind of extraction technology they have to use for safely removing the material, whether it is direct extraction or hydrometallurgy or any other technology which are very suitable, so that they can reduce environmental footprint, carbon footprint. I think that we have talked about. And then that also can be fed back to the battery Aadhaar from their point of view.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I'm sure that EPR, the enforcement of EPR, will see a lot of use cases for the battery Aadhaar. The battery Aadhaar will see a lot of use cases for implementation of better EPR in the country.
So one aspect, Anubhav, I can bring also
Yeah.
to add to what Shura said. So we talked about, so what is really a battery passport at its heart, right? So it's a QR code with some data attributes behind it, right? So which is stamped onto the battery. When we talk about recycling process, after recycling process, the battery ceases to exist. There's no battery anymore, right? So you dismantle the battery, you shred it, you recycle it, you'd go through thermal chemical treatment, and then you have black mass. Now you have black mass, which is not a battery. Now the whole point is what happens to the battery passport now?
Yeah.
So there's concept about a second economic operator where you transfer the passport of a battery into second usage. Why second usage? Because when you go to second usage, you're repurposing the battery, which means you might replace certain modules. You might replace certain cells. So now it's not the OEM battery anymore. So the cells could be of different types, different cell chemistry, right? So and then you need to update the passport. So when it goes to what Alex also said, when it moves countries, when it goes country borders, then you're repurposing a battery for secondary usage. You fit in new cells to it, and then the passport, and then when you go to recycling, the battery ceases to exist. So the whole concept is you need to feed back the data that was clearly described to the existing passport and archive it, so that this could be then linked to the next battery passport, which is built by the recycled materials. This is called transfer of passports that we are discussing here.
Yeah, so definitely when a battery goes into a second life, it does bring in this concept of the question of who then owns the battery passport.
Now, no longer the OEM anymore, right? So it cannot be OEM anymore.
Yeah, yeah. So, so I guess we are quite ahead of the slotted time that we had for the webinar. It was a pretty interesting webinar, and we were happy that almost the peak attendees reached up to 150. So this goes on to show that this is a pretty interesting discussion that's happening in the country. And we have such experts coming together, and we hope to develop a very robust battery Aadhaar/passport policy for India. Once again, thank all the guests. Thank you, Chaitanya and Abhishek, and to all the attendees who took some time out and could be part of this webinar. Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.